So welcome to the Business Cup Challenge 2019, hosted by Curtin University, Dubai. My name is Dan Adkins. I'm the CEO of Transnational Academic Group, which is the education management services provider for Curtin University, Dubai. And today I'm going to talk to you about artificial intelligence. Before joining the Academy, I spent 20 years working in the IT industry for companies like IBM, Dell, Coca-Cola, Hershey's, Clorox, and Visa. In that time, I had a lot of opportunity to work with many different types of computer systems, including expert systems, which were the predecessors of today's artificial intelligence systems. In the newspapers, on TV, in books and movies, you're hearing quite a bit about artificial intelligence. In some cases, you hear about artificial intelligence replacing all of the jobs and all of us becoming unemployed. In other cases, you hear about artificial intelligence winning chess championships, beating the Go champion, or even incorrectly sentencing people to jail. So today we're going to talk about what artificial intelligence is, what it can actually do, and how to apply that to the BCC case studies that you'll receive. When we start thinking about a technology like artificial intelligence, there's a lot of hype around this. And this comes because newspapers and websites need to get readers and need to get clicks. So they'll put sensationalistic headlines and then leave you to click on it to find out what the true story is. Gartner Group, which is one of the world's leading management consulting and data analysis firms, has put together the hype cycle for emerging technologies. And what you'll see is at the beginning, there's not much hype because the only people who know about the technology are the ones who are directly working on it and a few people who read pre-press publications. Once the news media gets a hold of it though, the hype starts shooting up because the news media needs to get clicks, so they portray the most sensational versions of the story. This gets a lot of people excited, it gets a lot of people scared, but it doesn't reflect the reality of what that technology can do. Very soon though, the news media moves on to the next big thing, and you see the hype drops off as people start to learn more about the technology and become disenchanted with it because it doesn't do everything that was portrayed. I'm still waiting for my jetpack and my flying car that they talked about in the 1950s and was supposed to be just 10 years away. And now in 2019, it's still just 10 years away. Eventually, if the technology is good, it levels out and people understand what the technology can do and what its weaknesses are. And then it's out of hype and into practical usage. Right now, AI is very near the top of this hype cycle. It's been heavily in the news for the past 18 months to 2 years. It's being talked about as doing everything from taking over jobs to taking over the world. So we'll look at what it really can do, and we'll look at what we can do in our case studies in order to make it a useful solution for the companies that we're talking about. Students today are living through a very unique time. The rate of change that they're facing is greater than at any other time in the history of humankind. A good way to consider this is how long did it take each of prior technologies to reach 50 million users? So if we look at the airplane, from the first commercial flight until the 50 millionth passenger took 68 years. 62 years for the car, 50 years for the telephone. But when we get to the things that students of today have lived through, Facebook took 3 years, Twitter 2, Pokemon Go 19 days. This is a multi-scale improvement in how quickly we get to 50 million users. And in the future, it will be even faster. If you think of things that go viral on the internet now, they very likely get 50 million users or 50 million views within a matter of hours. But AI actually isn't as new as the news media would have you think. It was originally proposed by Alan Turing back in 1950. Alan Turing was a tremendous insight into mathematics and into code breaking. He was working with the team at Bletchley Park that solved the Nazi Enigma code and allowed the Allies to know what the Nazis were going to do and end the war sooner, probably saving hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives. At that time, a computer was the size of a very large room and probably had about 4 kilobytes of memory, which would hold the first maybe 1 second of an MP3. But even at this time, Alan Turing had the vision to imagine a time when a computer could communicate with a human, albeit through teletype, since they didn't even have monitors back then, in a way that the human being wouldn't know whether they were talking to a computer or to another person. This is now called the Turing test. And it wasn't until about 2010 that the first computer, actually through a text chat, was able to convince the majority of judges, 6 out of 10, that it was in fact a person. In the past 18 months, though, there's been another great stride forward in this. Google created an assistant that was able to have voice talk with anybody in the world and actually set up nail and hair appointments for people. It was so believable that the people who were setting the appointments did not know that they were talking to a machine instead of a person. The Google engine actually had the same voice inflection, the same pauses, the same verbal tics that a human being does, and was completely believable. So some 70 years after Alan Turing first proposed it, we have computers that can truly fool other human beings into thinking they're talking to a person. The name artificial intelligence actually wasn't coined until 1955 by John McCarthy at a conference at Dartmouth University. But even after the term was coined, it wasn't widely used. When I was working on artificial intelligence systems 25 years ago, everyone in the IT industry still called them expert systems. The use of AI really came about through the work of science fiction writers and later science fiction translated into movies. Expert systems, as they're portrayed in most books and movies and television shows, are systems that are replacing humans, that can think and act like a human. But that's not the AI that's actually being used by business. There are actually 3 levels of AI, and we'll go through those one by one. What is in use in business right now is called narrow AI. It's a set of programs that's able to solve a well-defined problem quickly and accurately. But that's all it does. It is able to do things that would take humans many years, maybe even many decades, and it's able to provide functionality that there just aren't enough people to provide if you had to have people analyzing all of the data. So narrow AI is very useful and it's in wide use. What you see portrayed in books and movies tends to be general AI. General AI is supposed to fully simulate how a human being thinks and be able to do the generalized problem solving that humans can do. While this sounds like a great thing and also sounds like something that could put a lot of people out of jobs, there's one small problem. The very best psychologists and neuroscientists can't tell us how the brain works. If you're going to build a building, you have to understand how buildings work. If you want to build an automobile, you have to understand how cars work. how would it be possible for us to build an AI that thinks like a human when the best scientists who study human thinking don't know how a human thinks? It's impossible. It also wouldn't be practical. If you think about the cost of building a general AI, it's currently estimated at over $1 trillion, although no one really knows because no one knows how humans think. But if we take the figure of $1 trillion and compare that to the cost of employing people, $1 trillion would be enough to employ an entire company full of people for probably 100 years. So why would a company spend $1 trillion, if they even had that much, to build a general AI when they could easily employ people to do that? Or write narrow AIs that solve the specific problems they need solved and have them do it at a much cheaper cost. There's also the security consideration. Any cybersecurity expert will tell you that the more functions a piece of software has, the greater the attack surface for hackers, because every function opens up another gateway for attack. A narrow AI, because it does one thing, is easy for the programmer to understand. It's easy for cybersecurity experts to inspect it and make sure that it doesn't have cybersecurity holes. It's hard for hackers to attack. A general AI, on the other hand, because it's supposed to do everything a human brain can, would expose so many vulnerabilities that it would be unsafe to use. The final level of AI takes this even a step further, and we call it strong or super AI. This is where the AI system not only can think like a human, but actually becomes self-aware. It knows that it exists, just like humans know that they exist. It understands it has agency. This is what often gets portrayed in books and movies. The problem with this, besides the fact that we can't build the general AI that it needs, is super AI requires an understanding of how consciousness works. And at this point, again, the best psychologist and neuroscientist can't explain how consciousness arises in human beings or other animals. They've developed what's called the mirror test, where they test animals to see if they're self-aware by putting a little dot on their face or on their body and putting a mirror in front of them to see if they can recognize that that's them in the mirror and then try and do something about the dot. Certain animals like primates, dolphins, and whales, and even some crows are able to recognize themselves in the mirror and understand that this dot is on them. But most animals aren't. But even with that knowledge, scientists still don't know how that kind of self-awareness arises. So how could we program it into a computer? It would also present an ethical dilemma. If a machine is self-aware and we turn off the power, have we just committed murder? We think that with humans, if a human is self-aware and we turn them off, that's illegal. So it raises a bunch of ethical concerns as well. So let's look at the three different types of AI and an example. So narrow AI is like Deep Blue, which beat the world chess champion at chess. This is a system that's able to solve one kind of problem, do it very accurately, very quickly. These work great, and they really exist. General AI is more like HAL 9000 from Arthur C. Clarke's book, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Hal could think like a human, although he wasn't self-aware, and he was able to tell Dave, no, I can't open the airlock for you, and things like that. But he still didn't understand that he had agency, that he was an entity. We see that with super AI in movies like The Terminator, iRobot, and The Matrix. And the way science fiction writers tend to portray it as soon as AI becomes self-aware, it decides that it needs to either kill off or enslave all of the humans because we represent a threat. We might turn it off or turn off the power. So to try and get around that, they've created rules to protect us. In the movie I, Robot, it talks about the rules Isaac Asimov created in the 1940s that were the 3 laws of robotics, or AI. So the first rule said a robot or an artificial intelligence cannot harm a human or through inaction allow a human to be harmed. The second rule said that the AI or the robot must obey humans as long as it doesn't violate the first rule. And then the third rule says it must protect its own existence as long as that doesn't violate the first or second rule. In the film I, Robot, the robots thought about it and said, well, human beings are doing things that are dangerous. If we think about driving a car, that's dangerous. You could be harmed. So following the first law, I can't through inaction allow a human to come to harm. Therefore, I must stop the humans from driving cars. Or if you think about a human being going out to a fast food restaurant and wanting to buy some food that's high in sugar, fat, salt, and calories, well, that could harm the human. So the robot would need to prevent you from doing that. So following these 3 laws, the only way that robots could do that would be to imprison humans so that they remain completely safe and free of risk. And that's what happened in the movie I, Robot. So they then created a new set of laws of robotics, and they added the 0th law, where it said a robot may not harm humanity. And this was intended to prevent the robots from imprisoning the humans. But even that still creates problems, because whose view of what is humane and whose view of what is right comes into play. If we look across the world at different cultures, there are very different views on what's right and what should be allowed. Which set of rules would the robots follow? The problem is robots don't have the ability, or AI does not have the ability, to reason morally and to think about the different goals and values of humans and express empathy for those. So as we look at AI, for the BCC, we'll be talking about narrow AI. And narrow AI, as we said, is good at solving one type of problems. And there's actually an entire academic field of study called problem theory. And problem theory divides problems into 2 basic categories. And we'll talk about those and talk about which ones AI can solve. So the first category are called problems or puzzles. To recognize a problem or a puzzle, you'll see that the problem is clearly defined, the solutions to the problem are known, and the challenge is in how you implement that solution. How efficiently can you implement it? And we'll look at a specific example of that in a moment. The other type of problem is called a wicked problem or a mess. In these, the problem is unknown or even ambiguous. The problem has never been solved by anyone before. There's no perfect solution. Any solution is going to leave somebody upset with the outcome. And it always involves some type of conflict between the goals and values of an individual or different groups. You can also think of it like an ogre. If you remember the movie Shrek, Shrek was trying to describe to Donkey how ogres were. And he said, ogres are like onions. And Donkey said, yeah, you smell. It's like, no, we have layers. Wicked problems and messes are like that. You'll work on what you see as the problem, and when you solve it, you'll find that you've just peeled back one layer of the onion, and there's another layer, another problem there that stinks just as badly, and you've got to solve that. and then peel back that layer. And there may be many, many layers before you get to a final solution. So let's look at a problem and then a wicked problem to see the difference. So chess and Go, which are the two most complex games humans have ever devised, are examples of problems. The problem is understood to win the game. The method to solve the problem is understood. That's the rules of the game. And the challenge is simply in the implementation. So Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, many years ago. Just a few years ago, AlphaGo beat the world Go champion in 3 games out of 4. The team that developed AlphaGo then developed a new AI, where AlphaGo had learned from going through and reviewing all of the games of Go that had been recorded and seeing how humans played. With the new AI, they simply told it the rules of the game and made it play itself. Over the course of a month, it learned what worked and didn't work and kept getting better and better. And by the end of 1 month of this self-learning, it was able to beat the original AlphaGo 100 times out of 100. So if you think of how AlphaGo could beat the human, and then this was so much better, clearly when it comes to solving this kind of problem, AI does it far better than any human being ever will be able to. Now let's compare that to a wicked problem. This map shows the western half of the United States. Everywhere that you see coloring on the map is a place where there is a potential for conflict over water. Everywhere that you see orange or red are places where there actually has been armed conflict at some time in the past over water. If you know your history, you'll know that in the world there have been numerous times when there have been wars fought over rights to water. And if we look at the different goals and values of the people involved with this, you'll start to understand why. So people who live in suburban areas want water to water their lawns and keep their grass green. Farmers want water to grow their crops. I think all of us have gotten used to eating on a regular basis and not starving to death. If we don't provide water for the farmers, we have no food, and the farmers have no money and go bankrupt. People who are adventurous and enjoy the outdoors want water for recreation purposes. People who are concerned about the environment want enough water that the streams can keep flowing, the fish can survive, they can swim upstream and spawn and make more fish. Of course, the oil companies are looking for water that they can pump into the ground under high pressure to fracture the rock and extract oil and gas at a very cheap price. And I think all of us have gotten used to not dying of thirst, so we'd all like some water to drink and maybe even take a shower every so often. The problem is there's not enough water to satisfy all of these needs. If we ask an AI to do it, it would use the principle of economic maximalization. What uses of water generate economic return and the greatest economic return? Well, and obviously, that would be water for fracking and extracting oil and water for farming. But if we take that approach, there may not be any water for us to drink. So the oil companies and the farmers make lots of money and the rest of us die of thirst. The reason for this is an AI doesn't understand what's important to humans. It can only do calculations and say what generates the most economic value. And how do you put a value on someone's fun and recreation? Only another human can understand that. That's why AI is not good at solving this kind of problems. You can look at it this way. Computers are good at some things, solving defined problems, doing it quickly and accurately. Humans are good at other things. specifically anything that involves dealing with other humans, understanding human psychology, human relations, negotiations, things like that. Everything that's in this area of the blue can be done by a narrow AI. This area of overlap would require general or strong AI, which likely will not exist in our lifetime, if ever. There are also some problems that AI has. Current AI runs into difficulties due to three main factors. The first is called programmer bias. If you look at where the majority of the big tech companies are in the world, Microsoft, Apple, Intel, Google, Amazon, they're all based in the United States. And if you look at the teams working there, especially the programmers, they are overwhelmingly male and predominantly of European or white ancestry. Because of that, the people who are doing the programming and who are deciding what data to feed to the AI are people who only have their life point of view. If we look at two actual AI problems that were programmed and the results, we can see how this bias came in. In one case, the team was supposed to develop facial recognition software that could look at people who were filmed on security cameras and decide which ones might be criminals and merited further research by the police. And in the other, it was to sentence people who had been convicted of crimes to eliminate human bias. If we look at the sentencing, for example, human judges had had problems in sentencing due to racial bias and even due to things as simple as whether or not you received your sentence before lunch or after lunch. There were studies that have shown that those who were sentenced immediately before lunch received harsher punishment than those who were sentenced after lunch when the stomach was full and the judge was happy. There'd even been cases where companies that ran prisons had bribed judges to give stiffer sentences so that people would be in prison longer and the prison company could earn more money from them being in prison. So it sounds like a good idea to eliminate those human biases. The problem is those biases had been institutionalized. So with both systems, they were given data on all current prisoners and the sentences that they had received. Let's start with the facial recognition. If you look at the US population, it's about 8% African American. Yet if you look at the prison population, in some states and some counties, it's over 60% African American. It's hugely overrepresented. And you might be thinking, is this because the African Americans commit more crimes? But really it isn't. It has to do with how the juries ruled and also with the way the sentencing was done. For example, in some places, possession of a certain amount of powder cocaine would result in a sentence of 1 to 4 years. Possession of the same amount of crack cocaine had a minimum sentence of 25 years. So if you were looking at the people who were in prison, this would largely cause minorities who were more likely to use crack cocaine than powdered cocaine to be in prison, where white individuals who'd been using the powdered cocaine would be let out very soon. It also reflected in the sentencing. So when the AI was set up to identify people who were potential criminals, it overwhelmingly selected non-whites for further study, even though the data really doesn't support that. And when it came to sentencing, it looked at the sentences that had been imposed historically and followed that as a pattern and continued to sentence people in an unjust way. The second problem is machine learning data bias. So this is different than where the programmers have selected the data and it's biased because of the programmer's view of the world. This is where the AI is set free on the whole internet and can look at any data that it wants. but it can still run into problems. A few years ago, a company created a chat bot and they let it free on the internet so that it could read anything it wanted to and participate in chats and comments. Within 24 hours, it had become a white supremacist neo-Nazi because it had been reading content on sites like 4chan, and there is so much biased content on the internet that it assumed that was right. Because the AI lacks one thing that humans have, and that is a theory of mind. Human beings understand how other human beings think. We understand that other human beings may be biased, may put out things that are false. And because of that, we filter the information we get. And AI doesn't know this unless it's been specifically programmed for that. So the AI just assumed the majority of what it found on the internet must be right. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who are very prolific in commenting and scream loudest on the internet are the people who are putting out biased and false positions. So any AI, because it lacks a theory of mind and an understanding of how the human mind works, is going to be subject to this kind of problems. And also not have the ability to have empathy on the human condition and what our goals and hopes and desires and fears would be. So let's look at a very practical example similar to the kind of thing that you would be solving in your BCC cases. So if we take Carrefour, which I think all of us have gone to and shopped at, they have an issue sometimes with their inventory control. I go to Carrefour to buy what I want, and unfortunately, they're out of stock. A good example of this is there is a particular type of sugar-free hot chocolate mix that my daughter just loves. And every time I find it there, I buy as much as I can to stock up so that we have it. Because most of the time when I go, it's out of stock. This same company makes 2 other flavors of sugar-free beverage. And I did an experiment where I went to the 3rd box sitting on the shelf, and I put a little X on the box next to the UPC code. And I put the boxes back. The next week when I went to the grocery, it was still the 3rd box. A month later, I went to the grocery, it was still the 3rd box. They had sold absolutely 0 boxes during that time. Now, during that same time, if they had had the product I wanted, I would have been buying at least 2 boxes a week, every week. A human being might be able to understand that, but from an AI's perspective, if it was looking at the sales data over a 6-month period, it would very likely see that the hot chocolate sold 0, the other flavors also sold 0, and conclude that none of these are popular, so I shouldn't reorder them. Where in fact, 2 flavors were not popular. The other flavor was so popular, it sold out within a week of being put on the shelf. These are the kind of things that an AI needs human help by creating an algorithm that understands things like an out-of-stock condition. So when you're solving your BCC cases, you need to think beyond the data and say, when the AI looks at this data to learn from it, is there any way that the data might reflect a picture that actually isn't true due to some other factor, like a particular product being out of stock? So let's talk about how the BCC will actually go. Starting from the week of October 17th and going for 3 weeks, a new case will be released every Thursday. And the case will be very generic statement of a business problem. The solution to that problem involving AI and a narrow AI is due by the following Thursday. The faculty here at Curtin Dubai will mark the cases and give feedback by Sunday, so they'll spend their entire weekend marking. Because of that, we require that the submissions not be more than 2,000 words plus up to 2 pages of charts, graphs, and pictures. We have well over 200 teams participating in the BCC. If each team submits 2,000 words, that's over 400,000 words that the team has to read and mark. So we have to put that limit in place. The submission can be in any format you like: PowerPoint, Prezi, a Word document, a spreadsheet, even a video, provided that the video doesn't go more than 5 minutes. When you're preparing your solution, you do not need to go into technical details on how the AI would be programmed or specifically how it would work. I don't expect everybody watching this video to go home and start watching YouTube videos and learning Python so that they can program an AI. What we're looking for is the step-by-step process of what the AI would do and what data you would expect to be used by the AI in order to do that. If you're creating a new product or service for the company, we expect that you will give an estimate of how much you think it would cost to develop the AI, and then an estimate of how much revenue you expect to be generated from this new product or service. If you've instead decided to improve on a current process or product that the company has, or do something that will delight customers, we would still expect an estimate for how much it will cost to develop the AI, but then the other side of the equation could be how much money will be saved by being more efficient, or how much additional business will be generated because of happy customers. As we've already talked about, AI can have significant impacts on people's lives, sometimes even sentencing them to jail. So for each proposal, we expect that you'll list out political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal impacts. Even if there aren't any for your particular solution, at least mention legal impacts and say there are no legal impacts for this product or service. When you are developing your solution, you also need to consider both current and potential future competition. If you develop a very simple AI system to do something, you have to consider how easy would it be for another company to develop that and then compete with you, because that may impact the profitability of the solution, the product or service that you're proposing. Each week, we will be posting the scores to a leaderboard, and the top 5 scores on the leaderboard at the end of week 3's case are like people on America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent. You've gotten the golden buzzer, you go straight through to the final. But that doesn't mean that if you're not in that top 5, you should give up, because you still have a chance to win. In week 4, we'll send out the final case to everyone, even those who are not in the top 5, and we expect everybody to develop a solution to that case, because every team still has the opportunity to present that case at the final. We will also send out a separate topic that's used for an elevator pitch, because those who are not in the top 5 get to do an elevator pitch at the finals. The elevator pitch will be presented live on stage and will be limited to 40 seconds. For those of you who don't know what an elevator pitch is, it's similar to what we used to do in Silicon Valley with the venture capital firms. They'd call it a dragon's den. All of the venture capitalists would be sitting in a row behind tables to watch the pitches. There'd be a stage, and on the stage there'd be a timer that counted down 2 minutes. You and your team would go up on the stage, and in 2 minutes, you had to convince one or more of the venture capitalists that your idea was worth carrying forward and allowing you to come in for a 30 or 45-minute presentation to try and get funding. Remembering that they would probably see 400 of these pitches in one day, and that they would probably only carry forward between 5 and 10. What we're doing is more like what would happen if you went to the Burj Khalifa and got on the high-speed lift to go to the top floors. And right after you stepped onto the elevator, Elon Musk stepped on with you and the doors closed and it was just the two of you. And you had Elon Musk as a captive audience for 40 seconds. What would you say to him to convince him that your business idea was so good he should invite you back to his office and let you make a full pitch to him? That's what you'll be doing. The top 5 best elevator pitches will then go through to the final. So in the finals, we'll have the first team on the leaderboard present their final, then a group do elevator pitches, then the second on the leaderboard, and so forth, until the top 5 teams have all presented and everyone's had a chance to do their elevator pitch. And then right at the end of the finals, we'll announce the 5 teams who had the best elevator pitch, and immediately they will start coming up on stage and presenting their final case. So every team has a chance until the very end of the competition to get up and present their final case. So no one should quit. You need to be in it to win it. So when we get to the final case, you can present it any way you like. Be as creative as you want to be. You can present it in the form of a PowerPoint with one person talking or everybody on the team talking. You can present it as a video that you've made where you all just stand there and smile while the video plays. For all we care, you can present it in an interpretive dance and gymnastics. Any way you think will get your point across. But there's a strict 10-minute time limit. After that buzzer goes off, anything that you present after that point is not considered. So you need to practice, just like you did your elevator pitch, to make sure you can do it in 40 seconds. You have to practice your final presentation to make sure you can always do it in 10 minutes, even if you're nervous. The judges will then determine first, second, and third places. And there'll be prizes for the top 3 finishers and their teachers, along with some other prizes for people who've got the most creative solution to a particular case or who've been most improved, or other things like that that the judges decide are worth awarding. So that's everything that you need to know for BCC 2019. I wish you all the very best, and if you have any further questions, please email bcc@curtindubai.ac.ae.